Have you ever felt it? That quiet ripple in reality, as if the world outside suddenly mirrored the secret whispers of your soul. A dream appears in the morning, carrying fragments of meaning you cannot dismiss. A number keeps showing itself at the edges of your vision, like the soft fingerprint of fate. You did not seek it. You did not plan it. And yet, again and again it returns, wrapped in symbols, cloaked in significance. Carl Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity. Not mere coincidence. Not random luck. But something stranger, more intimate, and unsettlingly alive. It is the moment when inner life collides with the outer world. And once you truly notice it, your old way of seeing begins to dissolve. This is not just about signs. It is about what they are pointing toward. You are not as separate as you once believed. Your unconscious is not a silent storage room. It is a signal tower transmitting and receiving. Jung believed that what we call chance is often the universe responding to a psychic pattern within us, like a key striking the same note across hidden strings of being. Something in you calls out, and the moment answers. That is synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence. Meaningful not because it fits logic, but because it strikes you with the force of déjà vu and revelation all at once. Something deep inside whispers, "This matters." Think of the times you were at a crossroads, emotionally torn, carrying two truths in one chest. And then a stranger's words on the radio felt like they were spoken directly for you. Or a book found its way into your hands exactly when you were breaking. Or during a loss, you saw a pattern in the sky, a flock of birds circling as though orchestrated by something unseen. The rational mind dismisses it, but the unconscious pays attention because the unconscious does not speak in straight lines. It speaks in images and echoes and symbols. And synchronicity is its echo across the fabric of the world. But why does it keep happening? Why do some people see patterns everywhere while others never notice? Because to perceive synchronicity, you must already be cracked open. You must be listening not with your ears, but with your intuition. And most importantly, you must be standing on the edge of transformation. Your life is unfolding along invisible threads. Threads woven from your traumas, your dreams, your hidden desires, your fears and your longings. These threads shape not just your inner world, but the outer events drawn toward you. Jung believed we are all actors in ancient mythological dramas, guided by archetypes that live within us. The orphan, the lover, the exile, the king, the trickster. When an archetype awakens in your unconscious, the world begins to respond. You start to notice events and images that match the story your psyche is secretly writing. You don't just see a black cat, you remember the one from your childhood dream. You don't just hear a phrase, you feel it thunder inside your bones. This is not superstition. It is psychic gravity. The unconscious is not passive. It creates. It generates images, tensions, and sometimes even external events that mirror inner states. And when inner and outer align, not by cause but by meaning, that is synchronicity. Yet there is danger here, because synchronicity often arrives most intensely when you are on the edge of transformation, when your old identity is dissolving, when your ego is dying and your deeper self is about to surface. It is both a guide and a test. Jung warned, the ego must be strong enough to perceive synchronicity without becoming possessed by it. If you lose yourself in every sign, you are no longer interpreting the world, you are being consumed by it. So why does it happen to you? Because something within is calling and the universe is answering. Not in words, but in mirrors. Not in logic, but in impossible alignments that feel undeniably alive. It happens because you are waking up. Because your unconscious is no longer content to hide. Because you are standing at a threshold where you must either step into depth or retreat into surface living. Synchronicity is not entertainment. It is initiation. And maybe that is why you are here now, listening to these words, feeling this resonance in your bones. Perhaps it was not by chance that you found them. Perhaps it was pattern. And if you feel it, then lean in, because this is only the beginning. Once you begin to see synchronicity, it is difficult to unsee. The world feels alive with secret messages, as though every glance, every word, every chance encounter has been placed in your path with intention. You start to notice numbers repeating, objects appearing 3 times in one day, a phrase spoken by a stranger that echoes your private thoughts, and the temptation grows to treat each as prophecy. But here lies the danger. Synchronicity is not meant to feed obsession. It is not meant to inflate the ego or make you believe you are chosen above others. It is meant to wake you up, not to seduce you into endless searching. Carl Jung cautioned, the ego must be strong enough to perceive synchronicity without being possessed by it. Because if you surrender too completely to the chase for meaning, the signs begin to control you. You stop living. You begin performing for symbols. You confuse every flicker of coincidence with divine instruction. And this is where many lose their way. They start to read omens into every shadow. They begin to chase patterns that may only be projections of their own unresolved wounds. In doing so, they risk mistaking trauma for transcendence. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." If you do not face what you have buried, you will see its reflection in the world and call it destiny. You will follow signs that seem mystical, but are really your own pain replaying itself in disguise. This is why shadow work is essential. Without it, synchronicity can become distortion. The patterns you perceive may not be guiding you forward but pulling you back into old wounds, old betrayals, old loops of suffering. The universe mirrors not just your clarity but also your denial. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." In the same way, if you fight shadows without awareness, you risk being consumed by them. You begin to live inside symbols rather than letting them illuminate your path. So how do you protect yourself from being swallowed by signs? By holding them with reverence but not desperation. By seeing them as mirrors, not as maps. By asking not, "What does this sign tell me to do?" but rather, "What part of me is this sign reflecting?" Think of the time you ignored a dream that warned you of betrayal. Think of the inner no you felt before stepping into a room, only to pay the price when you silenced it. These were not commands from the universe. They were reflections of your unconscious wisdom. The sign was not outside, it was inside, surfacing in symbols. Synchronicity at its core is feedback. Sometimes it comforts and sometimes it wounds. The most painful coincidences are often the most precise. They point directly at the truth you least want to face. They demand endings, departures, or surrender. They ask you to walk away from comfort into clarity. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Synchronicity functions the same way. You rarely understand it in the moment. Only later, looking back, does the pattern reveal itself. So the invitation is not to cling, but to notice. Not to demand, but to witness. To let synchronicity speak in its own rhythm, without strangling it for certainty. To allow yourself to say, "I don't know what this means, but I feel it matters." That, in itself, is maturity. The true strength is not in interpreting every symbol but in resisting the urge to turn them into obsession. Because synchronicity is not a performance for the mind. It is a conversation with the soul. And conversations require listening, not control. The moment you try to force synchronicity, it retreats, because it is not summoned by will. It is revealed through alignment. It is the mirror of your psychological integrity, the outer reflection of your inner coherence. So the next time you encounter a sign, a word, a dream, a pattern, pause. Ask yourself, am I being guided or am I projecting? Am I listening or am I clinging? Because the difference determines whether synchronicity heals you or consumes you. It is not about collecting symbols. It is about becoming whole enough that you no longer need them to prove you are on the right path. And when you reach that place, the signs do not disappear. They grow quieter, deeper, more subtle, because now you are aligned enough to trust without them. Synchronicity appears most vividly at the edge of transformation. It does not arrive when life is steady and predictable. It erupts when the old story is breaking apart, when the ground beneath you no longer holds. Think of the heartbreak that shatters your sense of safety. Think of the loss that strips you of certainty. Think of the crisis that makes you question who you really are. It is in these ruptures that synchronicity steps forward. Carl Jung described it not as entertainment, but as initiation. He said, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. When your ego cracks, when your defenses weaken, the unconscious speaks more loudly, weaving its images into the fabric of the world around you. That is why the timing feels uncanny, why the song plays on the exact day you needed its words, why a stranger tells you the sentence you had been afraid to whisper to yourself, why dreams spill into daylight with symbols you cannot ignore. These are not random sparks of coincidence. They are the language of transformation. They are the proof that the old identity is dissolving and the deeper self is surfacing. But transformation is never gentle. It begins with contraction. It begins with rupture. It begins with pressure that forces out the false and demands the real. Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the unconscious with the conscious, the journey toward wholeness. Synchronicity is the outer reflection of that inner work. It is the mirror that shows you the unseen, the whisper that tells you, you can no longer live as you did before. Philosopher Heraclitus once wrote, "The soul is dyed the color of its thoughts." And when your thoughts shift, when your soul changes shade, the world around you begins to echo it. Events bend to match the hue of your becoming. But here is the paradox. Transformation is painful precisely because it requires death. The death of the accidental life. The death of illusions you once clung to. The death of a self that no longer fits who you are becoming. You mourn not only people but versions of yourself that cannot follow you into the future. You grieve the comfort of ignorance, the simplicity of believing life was random, the innocence of thinking pain was meaningless. And yet, through grief, something stronger emerges. Nietzsche once declared, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Synchronicity thrives in this chaos, not to destroy you but to remake you. The disorder you feel is the soil of new life. The rupture is not the end, it is the threshold. That is why synchronicity is dangerous. It tempts you to cling to signs instead of stepping into transformation. It tempts you to idolize the symbol rather than embody the change. But if you resist this temptation, if you lean into the discomfort, synchronicity becomes a guide rather than a trap. You begin to notice that the coincidences cluster around moments of decision. They appear when you are about to leave the old job, the old relationship, the old identity. They push you forward when fear tells you to stay. They remind you that life itself is invested in your becoming. The transformation, however, is not linear. It spirals. You circle back to the same wounds, the same patterns, the same shadows, yet each time at a deeper level. Each return is not repetition, but refinement. Jung once remarked, "We are living a myth whether we know it or not." And synchronicity reveals the myth you are inhabiting. It shows you the archetype that is active: the lover, the exile, the seeker, the healer. It tells you not only what you are going through, but who you are becoming. The question is not, why is this happening to me? The question is, what story am I inside? What archetype is guiding me? And how must I change to honor it? Because synchronicity does not care about comfort. It cares about coherence. It strips away what is false so that you can finally align with what is true. It ends relationships. It dissolves masks. It dismantles illusions. Not as punishment, but as preparation. And as you walk through this threshold, you begin to see the pattern differently. You stop asking for signs to save you. You start listening for what they reflect about your soul. You stop clinging to the world as if it controls you. You begin to realize the world is mirroring you. This is the threshold of transformation. It is not neat, it is not easy, but it is necessary. For without the rupture, the self remains asleep. Without the chaos, the star cannot be born. And in the silence that follows the breaking, you finally hear it, the deeper voice within. Not loud, not demanding, but steady. It tells you that the storm is not against you. It is for you. It is pushing you into wholeness. The deeper you travel into yourself, the clearer the outer world begins to reflect you. Synchronicity sharpens not when you demand it, but when you align. It is not a game of signs. It is the mirror of your psychological integrity. Carl Jung taught, synchronicity increases in direct proportion to the wholeness of the personality. In other words, the more coherent you become, the more coherent the world feels around you. It is not magic. It is resonance. The unconscious stops fighting the conscious, and the two begin to move in harmony. This is why chasing synchronicity never works. It cannot be summoned by rituals or forced through desire. It appears as a natural byproduct of authenticity. When you live in fragments, you attract fragments. When you live in truth, reality mirrors that truth. Think of the times your denial created chaos. The unspoken resentment that kept surfacing in different relationships. The shame you buried that showed up as judgment in others. The parts of you refused to face. These returned again and again in synchronicities that felt cruel. But when you faced them, when you brought shadow into the light, the pattern shifted. The outer world no longer mocked you. It began to guide you. Because synchronicity does not reward perfection. It rewards honesty. It responds to the courage of self-awareness. Philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts are scattered, the world feels hostile, fragmented. When your thoughts are clear and integrated, the world reflects that clarity. Synchronicity is the echo of your inner palette on the canvas of life. And this realization is humbling, because it means your inner life has consequences. Your denial shows up in events. Your projections wear masks in other people. Your fantasies find actors to play them out. The world is not neutral. It mirrors the energy you carry. This is why shadow work is not optional. Until you face the resentment, the fear, the hidden wounds, you will mistake their echo for destiny. You will call it fate. You will call it bad luck. But in truth, it is your unconscious speaking in symbols, begging to be seen. Nietzsche once warned, if you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back into you. Synchronicity is that abyss, reflecting not only your hopes but also your avoidance. It will keep returning until you integrate what you have abandoned. But when you integrate, something extraordinary happens. The outer world begins to move differently. The patterns become cleaner, subtler, deeper. Not louder but truer. You stop chasing omens because you no longer need proof. Your own coherence is proof enough. This is alignment. Not the alignment of perfection but of presence. of living in such integrity that the world no longer feels like it is happening to you, but through you. It changes the pace of your life. You begin to move slower, not out of laziness, but out of reverence. You no longer push against the current. You allow the current to guide you. You notice the small signs, the subtle affirmations, and they are enough. Because alignment is not about summoning miracles. It is about recognizing that life itself is the miracle. That every moment carries meaning when you are awake enough to see it. Jung once reminded us, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The more you awaken, the less desperate you become for signs outside yourself. Because now, the greatest synchronicity is not the world mirroring you. It is you mirroring yourself, finally whole, finally clear. And in that state, you attract not what you want, but what you are. You draw in relationships that resonate instead of fracture. You find work that expresses rather than suppresses. You create not from fear, but from flow. This is not magic. It is coherence. It is the subtle law of inner life reflected outward. And it is available the moment you stop fragmenting yourself for survival. Synchronicity then becomes quieter, but more profound. Not fireworks, but a steady flame. Not spectacle, but guidance. And with each step, you feel less like a seeker of signs and more like a participant in a larger order. This is the mirror of alignment. It does not flatter. It does not lie. It reflects who you are in every choice, in every thought, in every silence. And when you dare to stand whole before it, the reflection does not frighten you anymore. Feels like home. There comes a moment when synchronicity no longer feels like something happening around you. It begins to feel like something happening through you. The outer world is no longer a stage filled with hidden messages. It becomes a reflection of your inner coherence. This is the quiet gift of individuation. Jung described it as the process of becoming whole, the integration of all that was fragmented, denied, or exiled within you. And synchronicity is the proof that this process is alive. It is the evidence that your unconscious and conscious are no longer at war but moving as one. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is the privilege you claim at the end of the journey. Not the privilege of endless signs and wonders, but the privilege of alignment, of presence, of finally belonging to yourself." At this point, the signs grow quieter. You do not need them to scream. You no longer beg for external proof that you are on the right path. A single symbol is enough. A single whisper is enough. Because you are awake, and everything carries meaning when you are awake. This awakening changes how you move through the world. You no longer chase outcomes with desperation. You listen. You trust the rhythm. You feel when to act and when to wait. You stop asking life to justify itself, and instead you let it unfold. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once reflected, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Looking back, you see how the symbols aligned, how the patterns repeated, how the coincidences were not random at all. Looking forward, you walk with trust, not because you know what comes next, but because you know you are aligned with yourself. This is the essence of freedom. Freedom not from pain, but from distortion. Freedom not from solitude, but from self-abandonment. Freedom not from chaos, but from the illusion that chaos has no meaning. And slowly, without effort, you notice something profound. You are no longer just a receiver of synchronicity. You are becoming one. You are the moment that shifts another person's path. The word that cracks open their shell. The presence that mirrors what they have long denied. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are." This is not an invitation to create yourself out of nothing. It is a call to strip away the masks, the borrowed stories, the false identities, until only your true self remains. When you live from that place, your very being becomes symbolic. Your life itself becomes a synchronicity in motion. And this is the highest calling of all. Not to endlessly seek meaning in signs, but to embody meaning. Not to chase after omens, but to become the omen. Not to interpret the world, but to live as a clear reflection of the truth you have uncovered. At this stage, synchronicity does not disappear. It deepens. It is no longer the dramatic coincidence that startles you. It is the subtle flow that steadies you. The right people appear without striving. The right words come without rehearsal. The right opportunities arrive not because you forced them, but because you became ready for them. This is not magic. It is coherence. It is the natural rhythm of a life lived in integrity with itself. Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. But once you make it conscious, fate dissolves into freedom. The signs no longer rule you. You no longer cling to every coincidence with fear or hope. You walk forward knowing that you are not lost. You are being guided, not from outside but from within. And so the journey comes full circle. What began as whispers from the world has led you back to your own voice. What began as strange coincidences has revealed itself as the rhythm of your own becoming. What began as a search for meaning ends in the realization that you are meaning itself. This is the final synchronicity. Not a symbol in the sky, but the symbol you have become. Not a message from the universe, but the life you are living. Not fate, not chance, but the alignment of a soul that has finally remembered itself. And as you stand in this truth, the world no longer feels flat. It no longer feels random. It feels alive, resonant, purposeful. Because it is alive through you. And perhaps that was the point all along.